It's draft week, and I have the latest Pelicans rumors, including an opening to get Trae Young, Isaiah Collier dropping to 21, and more thoughts on a Brandon Ingram trade and a surprising big man the Pelicans could acquire. It's a jam-packed episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Monday. It is draft week, and we are going to just have a ton for you this whole week here on Locked On Pelicans. So please make sure you subscribe to Locked On Pelicans wherever you get your podcast. We're available on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I don't even know if I already said that. My mind is racing because we got a lot to cover in today's show. We're going to look at a Trae Young deal still, because now maybe the door is more open than you realize. And does that mean a Brandon Ingram trade gets done sooner rather than later? I want to look at Isaiah Collier, could be the point guard answer out of USC, and he is falling on mock drafts. And there's a reason to guess maybe the Pelicans won't be able to get a big man that they want. And then we'll look at someone like Brook Lopez, an update on Naji, Marshall, and more in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something new for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this team. So subscribe. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get into it because we've got so much to talk about here. And I'm going to kind of give you the plan for the rest of the week of Locked On Pelicans too. Things have been a little bit quiet on the Brandon Ingram front. You know, they could move him to Cleveland, but they're maybe not going to trade anybody. We've heard that maybe the Atlanta Hawks are a potential destination for him. Maybe they like DeJounte Murray more than they like Trae Young, even if I think Trae Young is the better player. But now we have a new report, and this comes from the Dunked On podcast with Jake Fisher, who's of Yahoo and has very good intel. And he says, quote, "I would suspect Trae Young is far more likely than DeJounte Murray to exit that organization," end quote. Oh boy, that is definitely a phrase, right? That is something that was maybe kind of surprising. Trae Young is an all-NBA guy, multi-time all-star. Murray has been an all-star as well. But when you kind of look at him in terms of just elite level players, I put Trae Young higher than I put Murray. Murray's a better defender, I don't even think he's a better point guard than Trae is. Trae has a lot of court gravity. And I think that's kind of what you're looking for. But as I've looked at a deal with the Atlanta Hawks, and we've talked about a number of them here, right? I struggled to see them potentially trading Trae Young. I think that's just, the guy they drafted. That's someone they'd like to keep. He's led them to some success, even if that really one successful season was kind of fluky and probably shouldn't have been what they kind of based everything off of. And now maybe they're kind of changing their tune about that. I struggled to actually see a deal where Brandon Ingram went to Atlanta and Trae Young came to New Orleans. But now with the #1 overall pick that they have this year, and whatever they're going to do with that, maybe it's forcing them to think about a reset, a restart in a way that they weren't before. So Jake Fisher, who's very plugged in with these sorts of things, to come out and say he expects Trae Young to be moved more so than DeJounte Murray, that is something that makes me go, wait, what? And put some stock into, some faith into, and something that really opens it up. That is basically the most natural trade partner that I think is out there with the Pelicans, is the Atlanta Hawks. They need a wing. They have two guards that don't work together. The pairing of Young and Murray was their worst two-man combination and one of the worst two-man combinations in the entire league. Think about that for a second. And if the Atlanta Hawks want to try and save some salary, Trey Young for Brandon Ingram straight up, I believe works. And it saves them a significant amount of money. That's a pretty big deal, right? Trey Young is going to make $43 million next season. Brandon Ingram is going to make $36. Adds about $7 million to the Pelicans cap. They can afford that. So you can get this deal done. They also have potential centers that you could take back. You could send Larry Nance Jr. to Atlanta, right? You could also then bring back one of Clint Capella or Onyeka Okongwu. And it gets a little bit harder if you include Capella in this because that trade doesn't work just as a 2-for-2 deal. And you also need, to think about the Pelicans salary cap situation and how likely they will or won't go over there. But Okongwu, I believe, works. And that keeps the Pelicans in an okay situation here. So you could get a starting center. You can get your elite level guard. You ship out Brandon Ingram. This is one of those rare trades where just everyone kind of wins. Now, a trade like this, I don't think will be done by draft night. To be honest with you, I don't think there needs to be a lot of draft picks involved in this or draft picks that are going to be used on Wednesday, the first round. The draft, by the way, is 2 days this week, Wednesday and Thursday. Second round is on Thursday, which is going to have its own wrinkles and everything when it comes to that. I don't think you need to include the 21st overall pick in this, and I'd probably like the Pelicans not to include this deal. If New Orleans could also somehow get Kobe Buffkin in this trade, I would absolutely love that, but I can't imagine that that would be the case. But overall, this is the type of deal that everyone wins. Atlanta wins, the Pelicans win, and it just fits needs for both teams. It's also very hard to try and figure this type of trade out. Trading a superstar for a superstar, and I don't know if either of these two players is considered a superstar, is something that you rarely see happen. So when they say Trey Young is maybe the one that's going to get moved, I don't think it's by draft night. I think it's one of those things where as teams kind of evaluate themselves and more, they're going to realize it's time to make a move and this isn't what we want. This isn't the right fit for everything. And so that's ultimately when I think you would see something get done after the draft, probably after free agency starts, because it's not like these two teams, the Pelicans or the Atlanta Hawks, are going to be big players in free agency. It's like, oh, we need to know what we have here. No, you're signing like third tier guys, if that, and not that many of them because of roster spots and lack of cap space. So all of those things I think are going to be, leading to this deal getting done closer to the start of training camp than on like this week. We'll see, though. Look, if that's what he's thinking, he's hearing something that he can't really say, Jake Fisher is, out loud just yet. That at least I think opens the door. So maybe there could be something coming. We'll see. Might be a busy week here. So you definitely want to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Let's look at the draft, though. Coming up next, 21st overall pick. We've looked a lot at big men, but I want to look at Isaiah Collier out of USC because there's a lot to like there. And if he's available at 21, do you almost have to draft him? But there's some things that really concern me about his fit in New Orleans and my draft philosophy going into this year. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by my favorite eBay Motors because my cars are on the road driving because of eBay Motors. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. You want to make it go faster. You get a supercharger. You need more utility. Put a roof rack on the top. Sound cooler and louder, and exhaust kit's the way to go. Just to see better at night, LED headlights. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. I have an old, almost 50-year-old car. I can get the parts very easily, and they have them on eBay Motors. My newer Jeep, out on the road because when I want to upgrade it and make it look cooler, just go to eBay Motors. Old car, new car, anything in between, they have you covered. And my favorite part with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because I've been there when it doesn't, and that's not fun. And that's why I order from eBay Motors. And also the prices, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to keep your car on the road and looking awesome. Keep your vehicle alive over at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Right now, I want to invite you over to the NOLA Star Bar right down the street from the Smoothie King Center. So next season, pre- and post-game libations over at NOLA Star Bar. And they play every Pelicans game home and away throughout the season on their big screen. You want the draft? They're going to have it on Wednesday. They have a pool table, video poker, an internet jukebox, and karaoke every Wednesday night. And they feature over 100 worldwide spirits and a hefty selection of local beers. And they are a true Pelicans fans bar, and even created and produced their own Pelicans anthem, Fly Pelicans Fly, complete with a music video. So join your Pelicans fans at NOLA Star Bar at 212 Loyola Avenue, open 7 days a week, 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. And check out their Pelicans anthem on the NOLA Star Bar YouTube page. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. It's draft week. There's going to be a lot to cover. The plan for the rest of the week, I have the whole week planned out. We're going to look at some names you need to keep an eye on in tomorrow's show. Trade targets, free agents, and draft names that you probably haven't heard much about just yet. Wednesday is going to be predictions. Who do I think they take at 21? What might happen in the second round? Another surprise name or two. And then what happens after the draft. We're going to go live immediately after the 21st overall pick or whenever the Pelicans pick. We're going to go live on the Pelicans YouTube page as well to break down that pick. And then Friday, we're going to wrap up the second round, but also look ahead. How much cap space do the Pelicans have? What can they do in free agency? We'll look at Trey Murphy and his future contract, Brandon Ingram, which we're going to talk about in the third segment of today's show. There's a lot coming this week because it's a really important week. So subscribe, join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube because you don't want to miss any of these episodes, getting you really set for the offseason, which more or less begins today. Now that we're kind of fully in draft mode, the NBA finals are over and all of that. So we've talked, if you're an everyday, if you're, a longtime listener, everydayers, by the way, listen Monday through Friday, you should be one. We've talked a lot about the center spot for the Pelicans, the big man, a center to draft at 21. We've looked at guys like Ware, Holmes, Edey, Misi, and others at this position, Filipowski. But the Pelicans don't have to draft a center. They don't have to draft a big man at 21 overall. I have said this offseason, I'd rather them upgrade the guard spot rather than center. And I think the Pelicans could kind of go with the center approach cheaply. Guys like Drummond could be had this offseason. There's others as well. And I'll talk more about a surprise one. Brook Lopez could be your starting center for the Pelicans next season. More on him in the next segment here. So if they just decide to do it cheap, and they might need to just because of the financial position that they're in, you don't have to draft one. You can just go in another direction. You still do have a bit of a need at point guard, I think. So what about if you addressed it in the draft here? And that's Isaiah Collier. One of the things we're doing at Locked On is doing a mock draft. So each host drafts for their team. We compile them. There won't be a big show about it this year, but I'll probably talk about it on one of the shows that we have coming up this week as soon as we finish it up. And one of the things that I noticed is Ware, Holmes, and Edey were all gone by the 12th pick. That's going to potentially limit the center options for the Pelicans. And while they really like Yves Misi out of Baylor, I don't particularly. I mean, he'll be fine if that's who they end up drafting. But maybe it just means you go in an entirely different direction when those names that you maybe really like aren't there. And that's when a guy like Isaiah Collier comes in, and that's kind of intriguing. This was a guy that going into this season was thought maybe to be in the running for a top 5 draft pick, right? Right up in there in the beginning before the season went on. And then when you look at his season at USC, it wasn't particularly incredibly impressive. 16.3 points per game, 4.3 rebounds, 3 attempts from 3 per game on not great shooting, 33.8%, 34%. Has some talent there, but didn't really put it all together in this season. So he's starting to fall on draft boards. Someone who was top 5 is now being mocked anywhere from 15 to 25. That's a potentially good thing for New Orleans. Now, he's probably falling because other guys are moving up. Duron Holmes is a guy that's kind of shooting up draft boards. Ware is a guy that shot up draft boards, right? But just because he's falling doesn't mean he's not a talented player. There's anything wrong with him. It's just other people like him, other guys better, but he can still be good. So when you look at Isaiah Collier here, who's 6'3" or so, has a good enough wingspan, right around 6'5", but is just built like a damn rock out there. This is a guy who has some straight line driving speed and can absorb contact, get to the rim, and score, and set others up with some really great passing ability. A downhill driver that puts pressure on the rim, and when you adjust to that and rotate over, can kick the ball out to your other players here. The Pelicans have a need for someone like that. They don't really have anyone who can do that at the guard position. Having that kind of strength already means he can do this at the NBA level. And when you look at his handle, it's really good. You don't see a lot of turnovers coming from him at the NBA level, though he needs to cut some of that down. More on that in a second here. And one of the things that when you look at him move and attack the basket, it's the strides. He does it in very few steps. Being able to kind of take those big, long strides, leaps forward, right? Minimizes the time where you could lose the ball, get called for a travel. Just minimizes negative things that could happen. That's great. There's some shooting potential in him, even if he's not shooting the ball particularly well, because you've seen him do it at the AAU level. So maybe that can come out from him. And the other thing is, he's a good defender. He's strong. I don't think he can defend multiple positions, but he can defend on the perimeter. And one of the things that he does very well is forcing steals, 1.5 per game at USC. That fits right into what the Pelicans like. Force a turnover, get out and run in transition, and you can definitely see him leading some of the fast break. But I do have concerns about him here in New Orleans. He isn't a shooter right now. There is some potential for shooting, but you just lost your shot doctor in Fred Vincent. So are you still going to be able to develop him the same? The other thing that we look at when it comes to shooting potential, and as I've said this for years, if you're a long-time everydayer of Locked On Pelicans, and that's free throw percentage over 3-point percentage is what I look at, and most talent evaluators look at when it comes to transitioning to being able to shoot the three at the NBA level. Free throw percentage wasn't good, 67.3. And when you see him play, there's a high degree of riskiness from him. This is a guy who likes to make some kind of insane passes, and passes that you go like, why are you doing that? I don't know if that's a basketball IQ thing or just trusting his abilities too much. Maybe that's kind of the same thing. But this team can't really afford to have, a guy coming in and turning the ball over in limited minutes 4 or 5 times. Right? There's many games where he had 4 or more turnovers in college. He has games where he scored 10 points, 6 turnovers, 15 points, 5 turnovers, 7 points, 5 turnovers against some top level competition too. That's the type of thing that worries me. Then he has games like against, Colorado where he goes for 25 points and just 1 turnover in that, along with 9 assists. There's inconsistency there. And while I like that he has talent as a player, can you risk inconsistency from this draft pick right now? This kind of gets into the topic of draft philosophy. Usually in the top 5, you want to draft for highest ceiling possible. This guy could become an all-NBA guy. This guy's just an all-star level guy if they reach their full potential. Then you got to draft the all-NBA guy. I don't always think that's the right move because those floors for those players can be really low too. If it doesn't work out, they're just nothing. We see that not often, but not often. I don't think that's Collier at this point, but there is some of that, right? Like he has a pretty high ceiling for the way he plays and his strength in his body. But if he doesn't put the shooting there, what's his role exactly going to be in the NBA? And when you look at this team, right, he would fit on a team with great spacing. You put him on the Boston Celtics and he would be absolutely fantastic there with shooting around and being able to play 5 out, 4 out really, because he's not a shooter. You don't have that on this team, right? Him and Zion, the lane is going to be unbelievably clogged. Even if you bring him off the bench without Zion out there, Willie Green isn't playing some of the shooters that he needs to play to kind of maximize a guy like Isaiah Collier. And so would he just be a dude stuck on the bench, maybe getting some minutes in the G League, but not actively contributing right now? Would it be better to go with a guy who has just a really good floor, maybe not an elite level floor, but a pretty high floor that's going to be able to contribute right away? You won 49 games. Everyone in the West is trying to get better. Do you just need to draft someone that's going to help you right away? Yes, Collier is a guy that could have gone in top 10, been a lottery pick, and you're getting him at 21. That's good value. But does that value do anything if he won't realize it? Because it's going to take 3 or 4 years. And at that point, the front office is fired, Zion's traded, and the coaching staff is gone. And then you're probably moving on from him too. That works in the right situation. I just don't know if that's exactly what the Pelicans need right now. But he's sliding. There is value there. If he's available at 21, if Ware is gone, if some of those other guys that you might really like are gone, and I'm not the biggest Misi guy, and the Pelicans like him, I can tell you that. They also like Collier too, I've heard. And if he's there, I think it's going to present a very interesting option because I can see him contributing at least in some capacity next year, and some of these other guys not necessarily. So, but do you have the personnel and the coaching staff to really maximize him as a player and get the most out of him? And that's something that I think you need to consider too when it comes to this. That's what makes this draft so interesting and intriguing on the Pelicans side of things. Let me know what you think about Isaiah Collier in the comments down below on YouTube. If it's between Misi and Collier, who do you want to draft? Between those two, who are you picking at 21 if, say, all the other good options are going to be gone? So let's talk Brandon Ingram re-signing, Naji Marshall leaving, Brook Lopez, and a couple other things when it comes to trades too. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Look, I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, the NBA's done, other things are winding down and we're getting fewer games and sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. And all I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. Again, that is daily bonuses or boosts all summer long. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the official sports book of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Now for your second to listen today, Ross Jackson, who's going on vacation, saw him this weekend, still covering the Saints Monday through Friday. Dude is absolutely killing it. He's got some big news coming on Locked On Saints too. We're gonna have to put a new title in front of Ross Jackson here in a minute. So go subscribe to Locked On Saints wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get into a couple other things. I said rumors and all of that we're hearing kind of around this team. One of the ones is, if they can't trade Brandon Ingram, don't think they won't try and re-sign him. They don't want to give him a max. He's not worthy of a max deal, but if you can get him for less than that, even if it's a 4 or 5 year deal, you can still do that. They still like Brandon Ingram, and this is something that I have said. It's not a guarantee that they are going to trade him. I think they would like to, but one of the things that I don't really imagine they want to do is go into next season with his contract expiring. You're going to be losing trade value, trade leverage by the day because you'll have to move him by the trade deadline. Otherwise, he could just walk for nothing and you get nothing in return. The Pelicans can't allow that to happen. They don't want to do that and then have to trade him for pennies on the dollar in February of next year. You're going to look to absolutely move him or you're going to look to re-sign him so that there's just more team control and that immediately ups his trade value. One of the things to kind of keep in mind is with the salary cap set to go up every year and they're doing cap smoothing as opposed to when it massively spiked that year that the Golden State Warriors signed Kevin Durant, you won't see that exact situation again. Signing Brandon Ingram on an extension now that's a fixed amount and not a percentage of the cap might not look bad in 2 years. You might have to tough out having him on the team, but again, they won 49 games. And if they can tweak other things, the team can win more than 49 games. So there's still potential here, even if the season ended in a very unfortunate way, not the way that anyone here wanted to see it happen. This was still a good season in a sense. Disappointing, but there was a lot of good there. You can re-sign him, have him under team control, and have to trade him in a year or two if you need to, and probably see his value go up. And I think people are going to look around the league and see people making $50, $60, $70 million, and Brandon Ingram might be getting below, like $40 million. That contract's going to look way better, I think, in the future. Any contract signed like now by any player is going to look better in the future with the way these are set to go up. Something that's worth keeping in mind is, and why I think partially maybe this drags on, is maybe they're trying to trade him, but also negotiate with him at the same time, and just take what works out best for you. I think that is absolutely an option for the New Orleans Pelicans and something that they could really end up doing. So don't think that it's a guarantee that he's gone. And I've said that's not necessarily the case for a while now. One guy who's probably absolutely gone is going to be Naji Marshall. Pelicans don't have the cap space to really sign him. He's never made a lot of money. It's been reported that he's probably gone. Look at a team like Philly to, if they can't land a guy like Paul George and they got to do something with their tons of cap space that they have, they could make a run at a guy like Naji Marshall. I think he also fits the Miami Heat like perfectly. Same for the Detroit Pistons as well. We're going to miss him. He, just useful player on a cheap contract. I'm kind of curious to see him in a larger role, and if that's going to end up being a good or a bad thing, I don't know. But overall, very solid contributor and someone that New Orleans should be really proud of having developed, especially when he's going to go and get paid. And the dude should get whatever bag that he can get. That is definitely the move for him. So final thing to talk about today. I probably shouldn't have saved this for the very end. Brook Lopez could be on his way out of the Milwaukee Bucks. And this is intriguing because for a while, Brook Lopez, it was like the ideal guy to pair next to Zion Williamson. You're looking for a big that protects the rim and shoots threes. And while he kind of put it all together and wasn't that player before, he's done a very good job for a couple of seasons now in Milwaukee. That was just his 6th year. And, one defensive player finished runner-up last year in Defensive Player of the Year, has made a couple of all-defensive teams since he's been there. And he's been durable for the most part outside of the 2021-2022 season. The last 2 years, he's played 78 games, then 79 games. But he's older at age 36, and the defense has definitely fallen off this past season, which was that him or was that just the Bucks in general? But to get a starting center that can give you some shooting and rim protection, he's not an amazing rebounder, is an intriguing idea because the Bucks need to do some things, so you might be able to make a move for him when you wouldn't have before. Here's the thing with that. He's older and he's definitely declining. So is that really the correct move? I'm not sure. He's also owed $23 million this coming season. There's not a way to make a trade really work with just the Bucks in the Pelicans. The Pelicans don't have anyone making that kind of money to just do, here's this player and a pick for your player or anything like that. And it's a bit of a problem. This is something that the Pelicans have run into when it comes to kind of structuring some of their salaries. And I don't think you want to only focus on this, but if you get it, it's good. CJ McCollum is making $36 million next year. Zion's going to be making $36 million. Brandon Ingram's going to be making $36 million. The next closest guy next season is going to be Herb Jones at $12.5. Then it's Larry Nance Jr. who's going to be making $11.5 million next season. There's no one in that $20 million range. And when you make trades, for the most part, in the NBA, you need to have the salaries matching. Not always, but normally. So if someone's making $23 million and you don't have $23 million to send out unless it's 3 players combined, that makes a trade harder to do. So I like the idea of Brook Lopez, and because he's aging and because of that salary, I think you could easily then, try and go and get him for cheap. But how do you make that work? And so this ties into something that we talked about last week, that, the Brandon Ingram deal is maybe a little bit complicated because the Pelicans like to combine multiple needs and address multiple things. David Griffin has done this now and make these trades more complex. 3, 4, 5 team deals that bring in a new starting center, shed salary, whatever it might be. You can kind of do all of that. So maybe, a Brandon Ingram trade does return Brook Lopez to New Orleans with something going to Milwaukee from another team. And it's really hard to figure out those 3, 4 team, 5 team type of trades. So I think that's someone that New Orleans should look at, even if it's a stopgap for 1 year. Trade for him, draft a center to be your guy in the future. That could really work. But it's tough right now to see a path forward where a deal like that makes a ton of sense. He's aging too, right? Like, how good is he still? And I'm not sure we exactly know the answer for that. Their defense was bad last year for the Milwaukee Bucks compared to what it had been. 12.5 points, 5.6 rebounds, 2.4 blocks. There's still something to be said for what he gives you. Shot 36% from 3 on 5 attempts per game. In Milwaukee, he has shot 35.4% on 5 attempts per game. Like, those are pretty good numbers. 2 years ago, 37.4%. It's something that's worth looking at because you'd love to see a shooting big next to Zion Williamson. We'll find out if the Pelicans maybe address it in the draft or they address it in trades. So tomorrow's show, I got some other names for you. Names on the trade market that you might not have thought about before that could be key guys for New Orleans. Dark horses that they could potentially draft. A couple of names that they brought in for workouts that I think you need to be aware of. Thursday, we're going to have the predictions, what I think is going to happen in the draft, what I expect going forward. We'll then immediately have the reaction that night, live show. We'll go a little bit longer. We'll do the normal, regular show first, then just kind of keep the phone lines open. I'll answer your questions in the chat, so come hang out on draft night, which means you need to subscribe to Locked On Pelicans on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. It's going to be a busy week here. We're going to have all the coverage that you want. So again, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NolaJake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow. It's draft week. Let's go.